Why did she leave me this? My billionaire CEO fiancée's sister handed me her ring. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's emotional story about two women whose love is tested by ambition, absence, difficult choices, and the courage to begin again, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story from our channel. It is quick, it is free, and it helps us continue bringing you more heartfelt, dramatic and unforgettable stories about courage, healing, second chances, and love between women. Your support truly means the world to us. And tell me, where are you watching from today? Share your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much. Now let us return to our main character and the mysterious ring that would force her to question everything she believed about love. Claire, whatever you think happened between you and my sister, you need to know she is gone. Natalie Harrington stood outside my apartment at 7:12 on a freezing Thursday morning, holding a small black velvet box in one hand and looking at me as if she had rehearsed those words all night. For a moment I could only stare at her. Gone where? I finally asked. Natalie glanced toward the hallway behind her. She did not tell me. 6 days had passed since I walked out of Vivian Harrington's penthouse with one suitcase, a winter coat, and the terrible certainty that our engagement was over. 6 days without a call. 6 days without flowers. 6 days without one of Vivian's assistants appearing with an expensive solution to whatever problem she believed could still be solved. I had expected all of those things because Vivian had always known how to respond when life became complicated. She sent cars. She changed reservations. She moved meetings. She bought things before I could say I needed them. What she rarely did was stop. But now Natalie was standing at my door, and something about the box in her hand made my stomach tighten. What is that? I asked, although I already knew. Natalie placed it in my palm. The velvet felt cold against my skin. Open it. I lifted the lid. Vivian's platinum ring rested inside. I had chosen it myself 2 years earlier after Vivian confessed that she could negotiate a $100 million acquisition, but had absolutely no idea how to choose jewelry that meant something. I remembered laughing in the store. I remembered slipping it onto her finger. I remembered believing that moment had settled the most important question of our lives. Now the ring was back in my hand. Why did she leave me this? Natalie's expression softened. Because she finally understood what it meant. I looked up sharply. What does that mean? Instead of answering, Natalie reached into her handbag and removed a cream-colored envelope. My name was written across the front in Vivian's unmistakable handwriting. No assistant. No printed label. Just Claire. I reached for it, but Natalie held it back. Vivian asked me not to give you this immediately. A bitter laugh escaped me. Of course she did. Even disappearing has instructions. Claire. I am sorry. I was not angry at Natalie. I was angry because seeing Vivian's handwriting made me miss her before I could stop myself. What do I have to do? Natalie studied me for several seconds. Answer one question. Outside my windows, Chicago was waking beneath a pale winter sky. Cars moved along the street 8 floors below. People hurried toward work, and somewhere in the building an elevator chimed. Everything sounded painfully normal. I closed my fingers around Vivian's ring. Ask me. Natalie took a breath. Did Vivian ever actually know what you needed? The answer should have been yes. We had spent 3 years together. Vivian knew how I took my coffee. She knew I hated thunderstorms and loved used bookstores. She knew which Chinese restaurant I preferred after a difficult day, and that I kept the bedroom window cracked, even when the temperature dropped below 40 degrees. She knew hundreds of details about me. But Natalie had not asked whether Vivian knew me. She had asked whether Vivian knew what I needed. I looked down at the ring again, and for the first time since leaving the penthouse, another possibility entered my mind. Maybe Vivian had failed to understand me, or maybe somewhere between. Loving her and trying not to become another demand on her impossible schedule, I had stopped telling her the truth. For the next hour, Natalie sat across from me at my kitchen table while Vivian's ring rested between us, catching the weak winter sunlight from the window. I made coffee because doing something ordinary gave my hands a reason to move. Natalie did not mention the envelope again. She seemed to understand that her question had opened a door I was not ready to walk through. 3 years earlier, Loving Vivian Harrington had felt surprisingly simple. I met her in a small independent bookstore in Lincoln Park, where she was standing in front of a table of new releases with 2 novels in her hands, and the expression of someone facing a business problem without enough data. She was trying to choose a birthday gift for Natalie. I recommended one. Vivian bought both. That should have warned me. She approached almost everything that way. If one good thing could solve a problem, 2 good things seemed safer. Coffee followed. Then dinner. Then another dinner. I learned later that Vivian was worth more money than I could comfortably imagine, but the woman sitting across from me on our first date did not talk about private jets or corporate acquisitions. She asked about my photography. She remembered the name of the first camera my father gave me. She listened when I described waking before sunrise to photograph Lake Michigan because the city looked honest before everyone arrived. That was the Vivian I fell in love with. The problem was that once our lives became serious, her generosity slowly began replacing her presence. When my old laptop stopped working, a new professional model arrived at my apartment before lunch the next day. When I mentioned that my building was freezing, Vivian offered to move me into a better apartment. When I admired a photograph at a charity auction, she bought it before I finished saying how beautiful it was. First I felt cherished. Then the pattern changed. If Vivian missed dinner, flowers arrived the next morning. If she canceled a weekend, she booked us somewhere expensive for the following month. If I said I missed her, she opened her calendar and found a future date instead of closing the laptop in front of her. 4 months before I left, I had a small gallery showing in Wicker Park. It was not a major career event, only a local exhibition with several photographers, but I wanted Vivian there. She promised she would try. She never arrived. Near closing time, the gallery owner told me an anonymous buyer had purchased all 4 of my displayed photographs. I knew immediately who it was. When Vivian came home after midnight, she smiled and said, "I heard you sold everything." "You bought everything," I answered. Her smile faded. "I thought that would make you happy." I wanted to tell her that I would have traded every sale for 20 minutes of seeing her standing beside my work. Instead, I looked at her tired face and thought about the hundreds of employees depending on her decisions. It did, I lied. Sitting with Natalie months later, I finally understood how expensive that lie had become. Vivian had failed to hear me, but I had spent years making myself quieter because I was afraid that asking for her time would make me selfish. Natalie lifted her coffee. "You are thinking about the question." "Yes. Do you have an answer?" I looked at Vivian's ring, then toward the envelope still inside Natalie's handbag. "Vivian knew almost everything about me," I said. "But I am starting to wonder whether I ever gave her an honest chance to know what I needed." Natalie nodded, but she did not hand me the letter. Not yet. And somehow I knew why. Before I could understand what Vivian had written after leaving, I needed to remember the night when both of us finally ran out of ways to pretend everything was fine. 3 weeks before I walked out of Vivian's penthouse, she made me a promise that sounded simple enough to keep. "Friday belongs to you," she said, placing her phone face down on our kitchen counter. I was preparing for the largest solo exhibition of my career, a one-night showcase in a restored gallery near the Chicago River. Unlike the small group showing in Wicker Park 4 months earlier, this exhibition was mine alone. 12 photographs, nearly 2 years of work, and a room full of people who could change the direction of my career. "No meetings?" I asked. "No meetings. No emergency calls?" Vivian smiled. "For one evening, Claire Sullivan outranks capitalism." I laughed because I wanted to believe her. Friday arrived cold and clear. By 7 o'clock, the gallery was crowded. Natalie came early with flowers. My friends arrived soon afterward. At 7:15, I looked toward the entrance. "No Vivian." At 7:23, my phone vibrated. A problem had developed with a major acquisition. Vivian needed another hour. I told myself 1 hour was nothing. At 8:30, I stood in front of nearly 100 guests and talked about photographing ordinary places before sunrise, when Chicago felt quiet enough to reveal itself. Halfway through my remarks, I glanced toward the empty space beside Natalie. That was where Vivian should have been. At 8:46, another message appeared. She was sorry. She could not leave yet. The strange thing was that I did not feel angry. I felt tired. After the guests began leaving, The gallery director approached me with extraordinary news. The Harrington Foundation wanted to sponsor a year-long exhibition program featuring my work. Everyone around me thought it was wonderful. I knew exactly what had happened. I called Vivian from the nearly empty gallery. She answered immediately. "Claire, I know I missed tonight, but I wanted to make sure this exhibition became something bigger." I looked at my photographs hanging beneath the white gallery lights. "I did not need you to make the room bigger, Vivian. I needed you to be in it." Silence followed. "The acquisition affected hundreds of jobs," she finally said. "I know. Then you understand why I stayed. Understanding why you stayed does not mean it did not hurt." Another silence. Then came the sentence Vivian always used when emotions became problems. "Tell me how to fix it." I closed my eyes. "Come home." She arrived shortly after midnight, exhausted and still wearing the charcoal suit she had put on before sunrise. Her phone rested in her hand like an extra responsibility she could never set down. "I am here," she said. "Now," I answered. Her expression changed. "Claire, what do you want from me?" It was the question I had been waiting years to hear, yet when it finally came, I was almost too tired to answer. "I want to stop competing with tomorrow." Vivian stared at me. "You are not competing with anything. Then why does everything important to me keep getting moved there?" Her phone began ringing. She looked at the screen. Then she looked at me. That single glance contained our entire relationship. "I need to take this." Something inside me became very still. I walked to the bedroom, packed one suitcase, returned to the kitchen, and removed my engagement ring. I placed it beside her phone. Vivian followed me to the elevator. "Claire, please. Give me 20 minutes. I pressed the button. "That is the problem, Vivian. I have spent 3 years waiting for my 20 minutes. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. Vivian did not follow me. As the doors closed between us, I thought her silence meant she had chosen the company again. I would not learn until 6 days later how completely wrong I was. 6 days after I left Vivian standing outside that elevator, Natalie finally told me what happened the next morning. We were still sitting at my kitchen table, Vivian's ring between us and the cream-colored envelope waiting beside Natalie's hand. "You think she went back to work and carried on without you," Natalie said. "That is exactly what I think." Natalie shook her head. "Claire, Vivian walked away from the deal."
Ist daher.
"What deal?" "The acquisition that kept her from your exhibition." For several seconds I could not make sense of the words. Harrington Capital had spent months preparing that acquisition. Vivian had talked about it over breakfast, during car rides, and once through most of a Sunday afternoon she had promised would be ours. She would never walk away from it. "She did not abandon the transaction," Natalie said. "She transferred final responsibility to her executive team. Then she announced that she was taking an indefinite leave as chief executive officer." I almost laughed because the idea sounded impossible. Vivian had spent 15 years building Harrington Capital into one of Chicago's most respected investment firms. Her work was more than a career. It was the structure around which she had built her entire adult life. "Because I left?" I asked. "That is what I asked her." Natalie paused. She said no. "Because Claire leaving finally made me see what I had become." I looked down at Vivian's ring. Natalie told me Vivian returned to the penthouse after the board meeting and found my engagement ring exactly where I had left it, beside her phone. She sat in the kitchen for hours. No assistants. No meetings. No calls. For Vivian, doing nothing might have been the most unfamiliar thing in the world. Then why did she not come after me? I asked. That question had followed me through every sleepless night since I left. Natalie leaned forward. She almost did. She had her driver ready. Then she stopped. Why? Because she realized chasing you would be another attempt to control the outcome. I frowned. Natalie continued. Vivian has spent her whole life believing that if something matters, you secure it. You negotiate. You persuade. You offer more. You remove every obstacle until you get the result you want. Her eyes moved toward the ring. She finally understood that you were not a result. The words settled heavily between us. I had spent 6 days interpreting Vivian's silence as proof that I had never mattered enough. Now Natalie was asking me to consider the opposite. Maybe Vivian had stayed away because for once, she was refusing to turn love into leverage. Where is she? I asked. I do not know. You are her sister. And she asked me not to find out. Natalie slid the cream-colored envelope across the table. This time she did not pull it back. Before she left Chicago, she gave me her ring. She also took yours from the counter and put it inside this. My fingers touched the envelope. I could feel something small and solid beneath the paper. My ring. She said you should have the choice of what happens to both of them. I swallowed. Did she say anything else? Natalie nodded. She said she finally understood that loving someone does not give you the right to decide what is best for them. I looked at my name written in Vivian's handwriting and felt the story I had told myself for 6 days beginning to fall apart. I had believed Vivian did not follow me because she had chosen her company again. Instead, she had stepped away from the company and still refused to chase me. For the first time, I understood that those two decisions might have come from the same place. I opened the envelope, and my engagement ring slid into my palm beside hers. Then I unfolded Vivian's letter and read the first line. Claire, if you are reading this, I finally learned the difference between holding on to someone and loving her enough to let her choose. Claire, if you are reading this, I finally learned the difference between holding on to someone and loving her enough to let her choose. I read the sentence twice before continuing. Natalie remained silent across the table. Vivian's letter was 3 pages long, handwritten in the precise style I had seen on birthday cards and hurried notes beside the coffee maker, but the words felt unlike anything she had ever said to me. I could come to your door. I could send flowers. I could rearrange every meeting for the next year and promise you that everything will be different. The frightening part is that I know exactly how to do all of those things. I know how to create an outcome. I do not know how to become the woman who deserves it. My throat tightened. Vivian wrote about the years before we met, when success had taught her a simple rule. Identify the problem, gather resources, remove obstacles, secure the result. That philosophy had built Harrington Capital. Without realizing it, she had carried the same philosophy home. When I was uncomfortable, she bought comfort. When I was disappointed, she arranged compensation. When I needed her presence, she gave me something measurable because measurable things made sense to her. I thought providing for you was proof that I was loving you well, she wrote. I understand now that sometimes I was giving you things because things were easier than giving you my undivided attention. I looked at the 2 rings in my palm. For 6 days, mine had represented rejection. Hers had seemed like another mystery. Now, they looked almost identical in a way I had never noticed before. 2 circles, 2 promises, 2 people who had mistaken commitment for certainty. Then I reached the sentence that changed what I believe Vivian wanted from me. Please do not wait for me. I stopped. Natalie watched my face but said nothing. Vivian explained that she was leaving Chicago without deciding when she would return. She needed to learn who she was when nobody required a decision from her, and when money could not provide the answer. Most importantly, she did not want me to make her transformation my responsibility. If I become better only because I expect you back, then I have learned nothing. Tears blurred the page. I had expected an apology. I had not expected freedom. The final paragraph was shorter. You once told me that your favorite photographs are the ones where people forget the camera is there. Maybe love should be like that. Not performance. Not proof. Just presence. I hope you build a life that feels fully yours, Claire. If there is ever a place for me in it again, I want that place because you chose it, not because a ring told you to. After Natalie left, I sat alone for nearly an hour. Then I made a decision that would have terrified me a month earlier. I called the gallery and asked to end the Harrington Foundation sponsorship after the current exhibition period. I rented a small studio in Ravenswood with uneven wooden floors and tall windows. I paid the deposit myself. Over the following weeks, I photographed Chicago again. An empty train platform before sunrise, steam rising above a downtown street, 2 friends sharing coffee near Lincoln Square, a woman laughing beneath a red umbrella beside Lake Michigan. Small moments.
Ummaneja moments.
Mine. I did not search for Vivian. Some days that felt like strength. Other days it felt like losing her all over again. Then, 5 weeks after Natalie handed me the letter, my phone rang. Claire, Natalie said. I heard from Vivian. I stood completely still in the middle of my studio. Is she coming home? Not yet. Then why are you calling? Natalie paused. Because I finally know where she is. Natalie told me Vivian was staying at her mother's old lake house in Wisconsin, about 3 hours from Chicago. She gave me the address, but I did not go. Not that afternoon. Not the next morning. A month earlier, I would have grabbed my coat before the call ended, convinced that finding Vivian would somehow fix everything between us. Now I wrote the address on a piece of paper, folded it once, and placed it in the drawer beside our rings. Knowing where Vivian was did not mean I was ready to see her. So I kept working. My Ravenswood studio slowly stopped feeling like an empty room I rented and started feeling like mine. I hung prints on the white brick walls, bought a battered wooden desk from a neighborhood thrift store, and learned exactly where the afternoon light landed around 3:30. One morning, an email arrived from a regional arts magazine asking to feature my new Chicago series. My first instinct was to call Vivian. My hand actually reached for my phone before I stopped. For years, every success had felt unfinished until Vivian witnessed it. I had blamed her for taking up too much space in my life without admitting how often I had handed that space to her. So I called Natalie instead. Then my best friend. Then I walked 2 blocks through the cold and bought myself a $6 coffee. I sat beside the cafe window feeling almost embarrassingly proud. Meanwhile, Natalie occasionally told me small things about Vivian. She never shared anything Vivian would have considered private. She only let me know that her sister was all right. Vivian had stopped checking company reports before breakfast. She walked several miles around the lake most mornings without carrying her phone. She was cooking for herself, apparently with mixed results. One afternoon, a cabinet hinge broke in the kitchen. Instead of calling someone, Vivian drove nearly 20 miles to a hardware store, bought the wrong hinge, drove back, exchanged it, and eventually repaired the cabinet herself. Vivian Harrington used a screwdriver? I asked. There are witnesses, Natalie said. I laughed so hard that I had to sit down. It was the first time thinking about Vivian had made me smile before it made me ache. Our lives were becoming smaller in ways that somehow made them more honest. Vivian was learning that being useful was not the same as being valuable. I was learning that being loved was not the same as being completed. Neither lesson erased what we had done wrong, but both changed what might someday be possible. 2 more weeks passed before I opened the drawer again. The rings were exactly where I had left them, beside the folded Wisconsin address. I picked up the paper and realized I was no longer afraid of what would happen if Vivian did not ask me back. That was when I knew I could finally go. On Sunday morning I packed my camera, slipped both rings into my coat pocket, and drove north. The Chicago skyline disappeared behind me. Highways narrowed into quieter roads bordered by pine trees and patches of lingering snow. Nearly 3 hours later, I turned onto the familiar gravel drive beside the lake. Mist hovered above the water. The wooden house looked smaller than I remembered. I parked and remained behind the wheel for almost a minute, listening to my own breathing. Then the front door opened. Vivian stepped onto the porch wearing jeans and an old gray sweater. No talersuit. No phone. No assistant waiting behind her. She looked peaceful until she saw me. Claire. I stepped out of the car. For one long moment, neither of us moved. Then Vivian looked toward my car, back at me, and somehow understood. Natalie told you where I was. Yes. Vivian lowered her eyes. When she looked up again, there was love in her expression. But there was something else too. Resolve. Then you should not have come. Then you should not have come. Vivian's words landed harder than I expected, but I did not move toward my car. That is an interesting thing to say after disappearing for almost 2 months. She looked down at the porch steps. I know. Are you unhappy to see me? Vivian lifted her eyes, and the answer was already there. Claire, seeing you is the happiest I have been since you left. That is exactly why I need to be careful. I had imagined this reunion 100 different ways, but never like this. No dramatic imbras. No promise that everything could return to normal. Just Vivian standing 6 feet away, refusing to make the easiest emotional choice available to her. Walk with me, she asked. We followed a narrow path along the lake. The morning air was cold enough that I kept my hands inside my coat pockets, my fingers occasionally brushing against the 2 rings. Vivian walked beside me without reaching for my hand. Natalie told me about your studio, she said. She talks too much. She also told me about the magazine. I almost called you when that happened. Vivian glanced at me. Why did you not? Because I needed to know whether I could be proud of myself without waiting for you to be proud of me first. She stopped walking. Were you? Eventually. A small smile appeared on her face. Good. We continued toward an old wooden dock. 3 years earlier, I had photographed sunrise from that exact spot while Vivian answered emails behind me. Now there was no phone in her hand. Are you going back to Harrington Capital? I asked. Yes. Her answer surprised me. I thought you wanted to leave. I wanted to understand whether I was running the company because I loved the work, or because I was terrified of being unnecessary. She looked across the water. It turns out I love the work. I just do not want it to consume every other part of me. I nodded slowly. I never wanted you to give it up for me. I know that now. Vivian took a breath. That is one of the reasons I did not follow you. I thought you did not care enough. I cared so much that every instinct I had told me to get you back. She gave a sad smile. A car was waiting downstairs. I had flowers ordered. I had already started rearranging my calendar. Then I realized I was doing exactly what I always did, building a strategy to produce the outcome I wanted. Which was me. Yes. Her voice softened. And you are not an outcome. I felt the rings again inside my pocket. So why tell me I should not have come? Vivian turned toward me. Because if you came here looking for the woman who gave you that ring, she does not exist anymore.
Esther daher.
What are you saying? I am saying I do not want our old relationship back. The words hurt even though I understood them. Vivian continued. I do not want you moving back into my penthouse and arranging your life around mine. I do not want to spend another year apologizing for my absence with things I can buy. And I do not want you staying silent until you are already halfway out the door. I swallowed. So you do not want me? Vivian stepped closer, but still left space between us. I love you, Claire. That is not the same question. For once, neither of us rushed to fill the silence. Finally, I pulled the 2 rings from my pocket and opened my palm. Vivian looked down at them. I brought these because I thought one of us would know what to do. Do you? She asked. No, to my surprise, Vivian smiled. Neither do I. She turned toward the house, then glanced back. I made coffee. Is it drinkable? That depends on how much personal growth you expect from 2 months. I laughed, and something heavy inside me loosened. Vivian held the door open, but she did not ask me to stay. I followed her inside anyway, beginning to understand that maybe the most important choice of our relationship would not be whether we put those rings back on, but whether we could learn to choose each other without needing them. The coffee was terrible, which might have been the most reassuring thing about that morning. I took one careful sip at Vivian's kitchen table and tried not to react. You hate it, she said. I did not say that. Your face did. I laughed and Vivian laughed too. And for a few seconds we were not former fiancés trying to understand whether love had survived us. We were simply 2 women sharing bad coffee in a quiet house beside a Wisconsin lake. I placed both rings on the wooden table between our mugs. Vivian looked at them but did not touch them. There is something I need to say, I told her. I am listening. Those 3 words nearly undid me. No phone interrupted. No laptop waited beside her. Vivian simply sat there and listened. You were not the only person who failed us. Her expression tightened. Claire, you do not need to make me feel better. I am not trying to. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. I spent months expecting you to understand things I refused to say. Every time you canceled dinner, I said it was fine. Every time flowers arrived instead of you, I thanked you. Every time I felt lonely, I told myself your responsibilities mattered more than my feelings. Vivian lowered her eyes. I should have noticed. Maybe. But I should have spoken before my silence became resentment. The admission felt uncomfortable because blaming Vivian had been easier than examining the ways I had disappeared inside our relationship. I was afraid that asking for your time would make me selfish, I continued. Your company employed hundreds of people. Your decisions affected families. My needs always seemed smaller. Vivian looked directly at me. Smaller does not mean less important. I know that now. She nodded slowly. And I know something too. Providing for someone is not the same as being present for her. I kept giving you what I knew how to give, because I was afraid I would fail at giving you what you actually needed. I looked at the rings. Maybe we both spent too much time being afraid. Vivian smiled faintly. That sounds accurate. For a while we listened to the wind moving through the trees outside. Then Vivian asked, "What happens now?" Months earlier that question would have terrified me. Now it felt almost freeing. I do not know. Vivian waited. But I know what I do not want. I do not want to put these rings back on today and pretend we repaired 3 years in one conversation. Neither do I. I do not want to move back into your penthouse. Good. I raised an eyebrow. Vivian smiled. I mean, good that you know what you want. And I do not want you giving up Harrington Capital because you think that proves you love me. I am going back. I know. I pushed the rings gently toward the center of the table. So let us not make another enormous promise. Vivian studied me. What should I ask instead? Something smaller. For perhaps the first time since I had known her, Vivian Harrington looked nervous about asking a simple question. Would you have coffee with me tomorrow? I glanced at my mug. Only if someone else makes it. She laughed. Agreed. Then. Yes. Vivian reached toward the rings, stopped and looked at me. What do we do with these? I picked them up, walked to a small drawer beside the counter, placed them inside and closed it. Nothing. For how long? Until nothing feels like the right answer. The next morning we drove 15 miles into town and found a little diner beside a gas station. We sat across from each other in a booth and talked for almost 2 hours. No marriage plans. No corporate strategy. No promises about forever. When the $12 check arrived, Vivian smiled before reaching for it. May I? You may. Outside, she did not ask when I was moving home. She only asked, same time next Sunday? I looked at her and realized that beginning again did not feel like going backward. Yes, I said. And this time, yes belonged entirely to me. 6 months later, Vivian was standing on a small ladder in my Ravenswood studio, insisting that one of my framed photographs was perfectly level when it was clearly leaning to the left. 3 degrees, I said. At most. 3 degrees is crooked. Vivian stepped down and studied the frame with the concentration she once reserved for billion-dollar negotiations. You are unusually demanding for someone receiving free labor. I laughed and handed her the level. Life had become surprisingly ordinary, and I had learned that ordinary could be beautiful. For months earlier, Vivian had returned to Chicago and resumed her role at Harrington Capital. She still loved her work, but she no longer treated exhaustion as evidence of importance. She delegated decisions. She protected evenings that mattered. Sometimes meetings still ran late, but now she called instead of disappearing behind an assistant or sending flowers afterward. I had changed too. My photography series had been featured in 2 more publications, and my studio was finally paying for itself. Vivian offered advice when I asked and stayed quiet when I needed to find my own answer. She never offered to buy my work again. We were not engaged. That surprised almost everyone except us. We had Sunday coffee, Friday dinners, and separate homes. Some nights I stayed at Vivian's penthouse. Other nights she came to my apartment and complained affectionately about my unreliable radiator. We were learning that closeness did not require one person to disappear into the other's life. In early spring, we returned to the Wisconsin Lake house for a quiet weekend. While searching a kitchen drawer for a bottle opener, I found the 2 rings exactly where I had left them. Vivian came into the room carrying 2 glasses of lemonade, and stopped when she saw them in my hand. I forgot those were there, she said. So did I. She set the glasses down. Should we sell them? I turned my ring slowly between my fingers. Once it had meant certainty, then it meant failure. Later freedom. Now it felt like a small piece of history from 2 women who had loved each other before they understood what love required. No, I said. Keep them. Vivian raised an eyebrow. Why? I placed my ring beside hers. So we remember that a ring can promise love, but it cannot guarantee it. Vivian smiled. That sounds suspiciously like something you practiced saying. Do not ruin the moment. She laughed and closed the drawer. There was no proposal afterward. No dramatic speech. She simply held out her hand. I took it. Later, we sat together on the wooden dock as evening settled over the lake. The water reflected streaks of gold and pale orange, and my camera rested beside me untouched. 3 years earlier I would have photographed that sunset. Vivian would probably have answered an email. Now neither of us seemed interested in being anywhere else. I used to think love was proven by how much you gave someone, Vivian said. What do you think now? She considered the question. I think it is also proven by what you refuse to take from them. I turned toward her. Like what? Their voice. Their independence. Their dreams. Their right to change. I squeezed her hand. That is annoyingly wise. I have had 6 months of practice. We watched the last sunlight disappear behind the trees. Maybe one day there would be another proposal. Maybe there would be different rings. I no longer needed to know. The first time Vivian and I became engaged, we thought love meant promising never to leave. What we learned afterward was harder and far more meaningful. Love was not creating a life where leaving became impossible. Love was building a life where both people remained free, whole, and honest, then waking up each morning and choosing, without obligation or fear, to stay.